Okay, this lecture series is over public opinion, political socialization, and political behavior. Let's go ahead and define the term political socialization. Political socialization is the process by which political values are acquired from an individual. It's a way that a political society or that a society transmits political values and culture from one generation to another. There are various what are called agents of socialization. These agents of socialization are the ones that actually do the transmission of the values. For American politics, we're going to look at basically 4 agents of socialization, and they are your parents, and what you typically get from your parents would be 3 things: your party identification, your ideology, and your level of participation. Individuals tend to mirror their parents. Now, it's definitely not a one-to-one correlation. I think the actual correlation coefficient is around 0.6, but it's definitely there. Now, the effect of parents in terms of political socialization declines over time, but it's still there, particularly as an individual is younger. The next agent of socialization is going to be the school. From the school, what the individual typically acquires is buy-in to the existing social order. Typically, what will go on during the school is the individual learns about the history of the country, its political system, its economic system, and either explicitly or implicitly, the individual is told that those things are good and that they are the best. A category that I have, and I lump together, would be peer groups. And inside of that, I'm including political parties, special interest groups, neighbors, co-workers, religious institutions, friends. These are all groups with which the individual chooses to affiliate. And what typically happens with these peer groups is that the values of the group tend to be reinforced in the individual. So people tend to associate with others that are like them, and then if somebody in the group begins to display values and beliefs that are out of line with the group will either formally or informally sanction the individual to bring them back in line or into conformity with what are called group norms. And then finally, you have the media. And what the media does is it provides the individual information as to how the world is, or what's going on in the world. It is virtually impossible for an individual to have information as to what's going on in the world through direct sensory input, because the individual is usually located in a work environment, a home, and so on, so the individual's knowledge of what's going on around him is greatly limited. It is therefore through the lens of the media that the individual acquires information about the larger world. So what the media chooses to show or to not show has a direct impact upon the individual's perception of the world. So if the media chooses to focus on violent crime, political corruption, and so on, that's how the individual will perceive the rest of the world, even if these characterizations do not reflect a broader pattern of behavior. So the media, while factually reporting what is going on, can lead to misconceptions on the part of the individual. There are some other factors that contribute to political socialization. For example, political events. Political events can change an entire generation's view of political life. So how this shared common experience, for example, assassinations, Great Depression, the turmoil of the 1960s, World Trade Center, terrorist attack, all of these can shape an entire generation's political views. And then there's also the generational or life cycle factor. What tends to happen is people's views change slightly or sometimes change dramatically over time. Younger people tend to be more socially liberal, whereas older people tend to be more socially conservative. And this pattern is replicated time and time again. So simply where someone is in their own life cycle can have an impact on their political beliefs. And finally, globalization. Globalization is the process by which the world becomes more interconnected. So with the advent of the internet and global telecommunications systems, people can, with great ease, acquire information about events worldwide. They can also interact with people who have different points of view. They can read newspapers, magazines online. It provides them with alternative points of view, and all these can contribute to an individual's political belief system. American political culture. American political culture has several points of agreement and disagreement. The areas of which most people in the United States tend to agree is they believe in individualism. Individualism means that it's the responsibility and the privilege of the individual to more or less dictate his or her own future. This means that the individual is exalted above the community. Another belief that most Americans have is equality of opportunity. Now, this is going to be distinguished from other forms of equality, but what most Americans believe is that most people in the United States should have an equal opportunities to succeed. Other views of equality would be equality of condition and equality of result. Most Americans do not necessarily believe in those, but most Americans do believe it is the responsibility of the society to ensure that everyone more or less has an equal opportunity to advance themselves. Free enterprise, or that is to say the private ownership of or control of the four factors of production. Most Americans believe in, or at least give lip service to, the idea that the government should have a minimal or to non-existent role in the economy. Most Americans believe in the rule of law and limited government. The rule of law, that concept means that whatever the rules are, that's what we're going to do. We're not necessarily going to follow someone because they're charismatic or because they seem to be the most popular person, but rather we believe that there's a system and it's our responsibility to follow the system, even if occasionally we don't like the results. Most Americans also believe in the idea of limited government, the idea that the government is not all-powerful and should not regulate all aspects of life. There are other areas in American political culture of disagreement. For example, we oftentimes will question the degree of free enterprise. We have different views on equality. As I previously mentioned, some Americans believe that if we are a truly equal society, by the time it's all said and done, most people should actually be more or less equal in terms of economic potential, should be more or less equal in terms of their standing in society. Okay. General themes in American political culture, number one would be increasing polarization. From the time period of the 1980s, we have seen increasing polarization. Polarization means an increasing division, not simply the division, but an increasing division between the two political parties and between the two major ideologies in the United States, that being liberalism and conservatism. At one point in time, there wasn't that much difference between the Democratic and Republican parties. You could find differences, but there was a high degree of overlap or shared values. From the 1980s on, we've seen an increase in polarization ideologically in the United States. There's also a general distrust of government, and that goes back to colonial times, so that contributes to one reason why people in the United States believe that the power of the government should be limited. Okay, we need to talk about measuring public opinion now. For an accurate measure of public opinion to be conducted, you have to use a random sample. A random sample requires that everyone in the universe, or that is to say the population to be measured, has to have an equal opportunity to be measured. You cannot allow people to self-select in. They must be randomly selected. The sample should also be representative in nature. That is to say that the sample should reflect the demographics of the society, have an appropriate number of rich people, poor people, men, women, various ethnic groups, regional representation, and so on. This is usually achieved if you have a random sample. If your sample is truly random, that will typically take care of itself. But it is statistically possible that your sample could only have or could overrepresent one particular age group or one particular region. But usually with a random sample, it's also fairly representative. But whatever the case, the sample has to be representative. The sample size. You have to have a large enough sample to minimize your sampling error. Sampling error is expressed in terms of the plus or minus so many points. It's the degree of confidence that you have in the accuracy of the poll. The sample size, to get a fairly decent poll, meaning plus or minus about 3 points, you need to poll, depending upon which pollster you listen to, somewhere around 1,000 to 1,200 individuals. There are some pollsters that assert that with their special methodology that they can get an accurate read on public opinion by only polling about 800 to 900 individuals. Although the best polls tend to be those that have about 1,000 to 1,200 individuals. Interestingly enough, doubling or tripling the number of people who participate in the poll after you get beyond 1,200 doesn't really increase the accuracy of the poll that much. So how do we select these individuals? Up until the late 2000s, most recently, what we've done is use computers to randomly dial phone numbers. While it is true not every American has a phone, virtually every American has a phone. So that's about as close as we can get to true random selection. Within the last 5 years or so, this has become more problematic as landlines are eliminated, more people use a cell phone, and those cell phones are not in the pool of numbers to be selected for various reasons. Also, with the advent of caller ID, many people won't answer the phone if it says anonymous or caller unknown or caller blocked. So this begins to skew the sample set, and it begins to cause problems for the poll. Problems that you can have in measuring public opinion would be the questions are asking leading questions, or that is to say a question that will produce a non-attitudinal answer. You can ask a question that's biased one way or the other, which might lead an individual to give an answer that does not truly reflect their opinion. And another problem that increasingly we see is lack of attention to scientific polling. You can't have a viewer poll where people just call in and express their opinion. That doesn't really reflect the overall population. You might also have problems with your sample set in terms of its size or its randomness, or for that matter, its representativeness. So these are all problems that can contribute to problems with your problems. These are all problems that can manifest themselves in your poll, and you have to watch for if you want to have an accurate poll.